Fable on the original Xbox is one of my favorite games of all time. And when the Xbox 360 was coming out and we knew we'd be getting sequels to some of our favorite series from the original Xbox, you can only imagine how excited I was for Fable 2. I still remember my friends and I getting in my car when I was only 16 and staying out past curfew to go to the midnight launch and pick up our copies of Fable 2. One of my buddies got the limited edition that came with the Master Chief suit and the energy sword, and I was so jealous because at the time I didn't have the money and I had to just get the regular copy. My assumption, like many when you're younger, is that the sequel had to be better, right? Bigger budget, a built-in fan base. This is going to be the best Fable yet. And when I played Fable 2, despite enjoying it a lot and finding a lot to really like about it, I ended up being slightly underwhelmed and really didn't care for it as much as the original Fable. I did like the game a lot, I had a lot of fun, put a lot of hours into it, replayed it many times over, but I was disappointed that it wasn't as good as Fable 1 in my mind. So what shocked me then moving forward was to find out that most people preferred Fable 2, and it was Fable 2 that went on to make many lists for the best video games of all time, not the first Fable. And I have spent the 17 years since the release of Fable 2 wondering why that is, wondering what I see in Fable 1 that people see in Fable 2 and why Fable 2 gets the respect much more often. It's the game that makes these best of lists. It's the game that people remember and talk about the most, that they want a remake or a remaster of, that they want the new Fable that still hasn't released to be more like. Fable 2 is the favorite of the series. And I can finally say now, after playing Fable 2 again, for the first time in 15 years, it's 2025, and I finally decided to jump back into Fable 2 and give this game another shot. I think I finally understand why this is the most beloved game in the series, and why this is the one that stands out as one of the greatest games of all time. With Fable 1, for me, one of the reasons that I loved the game so much was the story, was the characters. Jack of Blades being the villain, and how the narrative interweaved your character, your parents, your sister, and how it all tied back into Jack of Blades and came to a conclusive end, and then gave us the Lost Chapters expansion, which took it even a little further and really rounded out some of the rough edges and made a complete package. But with Fable 2, I felt like the main story was a little bit undercooked. I felt like the main villain of Lucian was not nearly as strong as Jack of Blades, nor as iconic. And by the time I reached the end of Fable 2, I just felt kind of underwhelmed with the story. The ending was not a boss fight or anything like that. It was just kind of a quick choice and the game was over. And that's kind of what I held on to for all of these years when looking at these lists that put Fable 2 as one of the best games of all time. I felt like, how? This doesn't have the story, doesn't have the characters that the first game did. But what I've come to realize on a further replay of this game is that Fable 2's strengths are not necessarily in its narrative, not in its point A to point B. It's everything that falls in between and what it did for the time in 2008. The original Fable introduced expressions. You could belch on someone, thank them, show off your muscles, or even fart in their face. This was cool and new in 2004, and in 2008, Fable 2 expanded upon that, adding far more expressions, far more reactions from NPCs. The light real estate element from the first game got properly expanded upon with businesses you could take ownership of, ways to adjust the interest that people have to pay you rent that would give you good or evil points, the ability to build a giant, massive rental empire. Then you have the relationships that were in the first Fable game that were relatively quite simple. Give a couple gifts, get married to someone. If you go to bed with them, the screen turns black. Some noises are made. It's implied there's certain things. But then Fable 2 ramps it up even further. You can get married and have a child with your spouse, and you'll come home from long adventures and you'll see your child run up to you and give you a hug. You don't have to exclusively play as a male character. You can play as a female character, which means if you get pregnant, you play as the character who's pregnant and has that baby. There's all these systems that were in the original Fable game that are further expanded with more options and more ways to play. And what would Fable 2 be without mentioning your loyal companion, your dog? Fable 2 introduced this concept of having a dog with you from the very beginning of the game that could sniff out treasure and help you fight enemies, and you would build this bond with your dog throughout the game that we really hadn't seen in any kind of game around that time in 2008. This kind of seemed like a new, novel concept, and even though the dog is pretty standard when it comes to AI for NPCs, you really do grow attachment to the dog by the end of the game, and you notice if the dog is not with you when you're running around Albion. So when I started to think of all the ways that this game expands what Fable 1 did, the relationships, the real estate ownership, your companions, the ability to have children, you start to see how there's many more options for people to customize their character and have multiple ways to play through the game and experience it in a new way. And it got me thinking, Fable's less about the main narrative, less about the villain, and more about this world that Lionhead Studios put you in, where you can have expression, customize your character, get married, impress people, make people sick of you, be good, be evil, own companies, have a dog. The whole premise of the Fable series and what Peter Molyneux is so often trying to do is to give you a result and effect of things. If you do this, this happens. If you want to look this way, you can go this way, but it will result in this. Do you want to build a companionship with this dog? Do you want to have a wife? Do you want to have a child? How will that child react to you if you haven't been home in such a long time? This really upped the ante for what Fable was when it comes down to systems and expression. So I think right off the bat, that makes Fable 2 stand out for so many more players. I think the fact that it was on Xbox 360 also does a lot for the amount of people that experienced this game and really fell in love with it. There was only about 20-some million consoles sold of the original Xbox, where the 360 had 85 million. It's obvious that a lot of people played Fable 2 for the first time as their first Fable and really fell in love with the unique brand of humor and style that Fable offers. But something else that I found to be really interesting that I initially didn't care for when I played the game the first time. The entire combat system comes down to 3 buttons. Range is on the Y button, melee is on the X button, and your magic abilities is on B. So when you're in battle, you can easily, with the tap of a button, switch from magic to range to up-close melee, and you can intermix and weave these things together at a button press notice, which makes for some really easy and accessible combat that also feels customizable and has the ability to make you feel like you are your own type of warrior with your own type of playstyle, which I think for someone like me isn't quite as exciting as what Fable 1 did, where it felt like the combat was a little more sophisticated and the range felt a lot more different from the melee, and the melee felt a lot more different from the magic. They felt more separate, whereas in Fable 2 it feels more cohesive and like they're all kind of similar yet different. Ultimately, I just think it's really impressive how they've taken this combat system that's rather simplistic and made it so accessible to so many, with so many options to expand upon it and build it the way you want. Added with the classic British humor that people loved from the first game, expanded upon and made accessible for a new audience. That doesn't mean it's without its faults. Like I said, I do think it's simpler than what we had with Fable 1. I think the fact that you can't really die, you just lose experience and get knocked out, and the fact that the story just isn't quite as good, the villain isn't just quite as compelling, does mean that the first game does things that the second game doesn't, and definitely has things about it that should be praised over the sequel. But I think as a whole, Fable 2 just manages to really nail all these different systems and make them work together in a way that really appealed to a broader audience and introduced people to this series. Take all of this and couple it with the unique expansions and Knothole Island, and see the future and the ways it added extra options for new breeds for your dogs, special quests that take place in things like inside of a snow globe, ways to change your character further, change the world, change the weather, and expand upon your arsenal with unique things like augments that do reduction in damage for an increase in gold from enemies and other things like that. And you have an RPG that's somewhat endlessly replayable. You can create multiple characters and do many different things and have many different experiences, but then also not have to deal with the fact that this isn't a 100-hour game. I think my revisit to Fable 2 has been an eye-opening one. It's a game I really loved when it came out, but was disappointed it wasn't as good as the first. And despite replaying it several times in high school, I just had left it behind for so many years and had let my time away from it color my perception of it. Fable 2 is an awesome sequel to the first game, and a perfect example of upping the ante and pushing ideas further from the first installment. Even though Fable 1 will always be my favorite, Fable 2 is really special and definitely something I can recommend to anyone. I think if the new Fable that's coming out next year has anything to look at, it's Fable 2 and what it did back in 2008 and how fans feel about that game all these years later. That's the game to look at, with some elements of Fable 1, which I still prefer, but those are the two games that really paint what this series is about and what it needs to be going forward. Did you get Fable 2 when it came out? Do you have a preference for the first game or the second or maybe even the third? What's your favorite Fable in the series, and are you excited for the new one that's being done by Playground Games? I think it's such a shame that Lionhead isn't around anymore, because even though they weren't the biggest, best studio out there, they were unique and they made some really great games that I treasure to this day. Tell me what your favorite part of Fable 2 was, where you felt it was lacking, and any of your nostalgic memories for it. I would love to hear it. I had so many going through my head as I played through it. I really enjoyed this game, and it's back on my list of some of my favorite games of all time. Thank you guys for listening. Make sure you leave a comment or like down below. I want to thank Cory and Preyanshu, Kyle and Colin, and I want to thank all of you for watching this video, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.